Hi, my name is Laura Burgoyne, and I'm excited to be joining together with my sister Connie Blackwood in the NOSA Unleashed podcast. Here, we want to expose the stigma surrounding mental health issues by illuminating and discussing real life challenges and obstacles, keeping us paralyzed and fearful to move forward. Let us inspire you to believe there's more to life than what you're currently experiencing. You can rise from your despair and find hope for the future. It's time to end the silence, remove the stigma of mental health, and to pursue the path to purpose and fulfillment. We will do this together because no one stands alone. Welcome back to the NOSA Unleashed podcast. I'm Laura Burgoyne, joined here with my sister Connie Blackwood as we talk about financial stress. And this is a topic I know that face all of us. This is a topic that has hit Connie and I very personally in our whole life. And so we have a lot to say on this topic. And, it's impacted us in many, many different ways, in many different areas of our life, and at every stage of life. And what I've come to realize is that when we don't have healthy mindsets when it comes to finances, or we don't have the strategies and the tools to use when difficulties come up, we can really get ourselves into some pretty sticky messes. So, welcome, Connie, to this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Now, I know that you and I lived a similar childhood because we're sisters, but I know that our experience of finances is varying, right?
Mhm.
We've had a lot of different struggles, we've had a lot of different challenges that come our way, but in a lot of ways, we've really had to face financial overwhelm and the stress that's associated with those things in really significant ways. And I know that this is a topic that impacts many, many people. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up. And I really want us to, just dig a bit deeper and talk about some of the things associated with financial stress that we don't often talk about, right? It's not something that I think is talked about often, especially if you're going through financial struggles. You don't often share that with people. It's almost a walk that you take in isolation, and you don't wanna share the nit and gritty with others, right?
Yeah.
The first the first thing I wanted to bring up, Connie, was, some of the things that can shock us financially, and some of these have hit really close to home for me. Others, I've known other people that have had similar experiences, and this list is not fully comprehensive by any means, but these ones are most familiar to me, or those that I've been working with. And some of them include loss of job or income. That's a very significant one that can shock you financially when you have a consistent income and then all of a sudden it's completely gone, right?
Yeah.
Another major thing that can shock us financially would be like major repairs on a car, or even in some cases needing to replace it completely. I remember for like at one moment, like we had this beautiful new truck, and then all of a sudden my husband was in a head-on collision and it was a complete write-off, right? So, you can have these things happen suddenly, and you're left with, the shocking devastation of what comes as a result of that. Another one could be home repairs, right? All of a sudden you get a hole in your roof, or your washer dryer stops working, like, a flood in your house. Like, so many different things can happen that can really shock us financially. Another one I wanted to bring up was deaths in the family, especially if we don't expect them and we haven't pre-planned for them. Like, that's a major expense and burden to put on the family in a lot of cases. And not everyone, prepares for that. Not everyone looks ahead to those things. And a lot of times when deaths are unexpected, um, prematurely, not only does that shock you financially, but that shocks you, emotionally and in other areas of your life. Another one could be, choosing to finance things, right? When, maybe you have a desire, maybe you want to do something, but you don't really have the cash flow to do it. So you decide, well, I'm going to, finance it, put it on a loan. But what you don't realize is, all that compounding interest that comes with that. And it just kind of, burdens you to the point where sometimes it's hard to get out of that. Hey, Connie, is there any other examples that you know of or that you've experienced or come to mind for you when talking about, things that shock us financially?
COVID, for one. When COVID happened, a lot of people didn't expect what that would do to their income, having to isolate, sometimes losing their jobs, sometimes having to change jobs altogether because some companies even shut down completely
Right.
because they couldn't stay afloat. So, and then along with that, I think like accidents and natural disasters and things like that, like they come out of the blue, you don't expect them, but they impact you in huge ways. Like I think about the floods that are happening around the world or earthquakes and stuff, and they're completely devastated financially. They need people to come in and help them. And you could lose everything in that. um, Business startups cost a lot of money. And sometimes when you're starting a business, you don't foresee all of the things that are going to cost money. And so it can actually cost you more than you're expecting. So even if you took out a business loan to get started, you could still be impacted in huge ways that you're not expecting. Divorce or separation is another one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because you're used to having both incomes, and then all of a sudden you're down to one. And sometimes, like if there's children involved, you have double the costs because you're paying for two homes, food for two homes, bills for two homes. And so everything just gets astronomically higher. And then, like growing families, sometimes you don't realize that you're going to have another baby. It comes and you're like, it's a blessing, but at the same time, it's financial pressure, right? Like if you
Yeah.
wanted to stop at three and then your fourth one's on the way, well, that's extra financial pressure that you didn't plan for, but it's a blessing regardless. And
Mm-hmm.
then, even if you're single, when you're with somebody and you get to the time where you want to get married, there's the looming costs of, the wedding and getting married. And then what if your spouse has different spending habits? All of those can be very shocking, especially when you're like dating and it seems like everything's the same. And then you get married and you find out, oh, maybe their spending habits aren't as similar to mine as I thought. Right? So sometimes it can be pretty shocking as well. So
Yeah.
there's some things I could think of.
Yeah. And when I think of all of those things, those are life events, things that happen to us or choices that we make that cause there to be added stress and added, um, burden on us when it comes to finances. But I think of, well, what does that mean? Like when those things happen, like when we lose our job, when we have these unexpected disasters, when, we have an unexpected death in the family, like, what does that actually do to our finances? Like, what are some of those financial concerns that come as a result of some of these things that shock us financially?
Well, I think one of them that immediately comes to mind for me is when your debt is so insurmountable that you have no other options. Bankruptcy becomes like your only option. And I think that one is like one that we really don't want to look at because it's not something that you want to do, but it's something that sometimes you have to do. And for me, it was an inevitability in my 20s where I had to go bankrupt. And even my financial advisor was like, you can't even make the minimum payments for consolidation or anything because you're not making enough. And so you have no choice but to do this. And so for me, that was that was really hard for me. But at the same
Mhm.
time, it was the only avenue I had before me. And, I don't ever want to go down that road again,
Right.
right? But there are times when that is your only choice and it's scary.
Mhm.
And then, like,
I
with
think
that also comes like this sense of hopelessness. Like, okay, well, now I'm never going to get credit again. Now I'm never going to be trusted again. All of that stuff. And actually, I actually did come to a place where like I've rebuilt my credit and right, like so you can come back from it. It just takes a long time.
right. Yeah, and it's an uncomfortable, difficult place to be, and if you can avoid it, that's ultimately the best, right?
Oh,
Because
for sure.
it's not an easy road to have to take. I know
Hmm.
some other financial concerns that can come up as a result of some of these, stresses in our life. The first thing that comes to mind for for me personally and our journey is, not like living paycheck to paycheck, not being able to cover your basic needs. I remember, growing up, like we grew up in poverty.
Yeah.
We never really had anything new. Everything we had was thrifted, secondhand, you know, was well worn. I remember, you know, pawning things just to put food on the table, picking bottles with dad just to, you know, get a few groceries, that food insecurity, right? And the one thing that we never had to experience, thank God, was that place of homelessness, not having a place to live, right? But I know a lot of people, I don't know what the percentage is right now, but it's high. It's like I would say probably at least 60 to 70%, probably even higher than that, are literally living paycheck to paycheck. If that paycheck were to stop, the next, unless they had family they could go move in with, like, and in an inevitability could be homelessness, right?
Yeah.
Unless they had some other resources, which, is kind of a scary place to be that close to the brink of some of these really devastating financial outcomes that come, right? And so, we really need to be mindful of these things and recognize where we're at. Like, where is our financial state at, and what kind of stress is it playing in our life, and how does that impact us? I can think of a few other things that could come up as financial concerns is, not being able to afford a vehicle, right? That impacts a lot of people, even in regards to what kind of work they can get,
Hmm.
where they work, in those cases, you often have to use public transport or different things like that, which really limits your, the options that you have available for even what kind of employment you get. So all of these things play into, you know, our financial situation when it comes to dealing with these stressful financial issues that come up in our life. And one other thing that just came to mind, Connie,
Hmm.
is sometimes in life, um, we're poor money managers, right?
Yeah.
And, a lot of I've a few people that I'm currently working with, um, and that I know personally really struggle with, when they're feeling stressed financially, they actually go and spend more money, and they actually buy and accumulate more stuff, which then just creates more overwhelm,
Hmm.
right? It just creates more stress, more pressure. And I don't know if anyone who is listening to this um, experiences this, but it's almost that lifestyle of like hoarding, right? You have that fear of not having enough, and so you hoard what you have, and just even living that way is such an overwhelming way to live. Do you have any other, yeah, thoughts on what some of these financial things can lead to, like some financial concerns?
Well, I was thinking like also for like if you have medical concerns, not having enough money means that you may not be able to match those, and even applying for um, medical aid can be a daunting process. Um, right now, like I used to have third party insurance and I don't anymore, like group insurance with my work. And I don't anymore. And so that impacted us significantly. And so now Walter, my husband, has had to apply for this funding program, and they sent us this information, this thing back where we had to go back to our doctor, get our doctor to fill out all of his prescription medications and all of his like medical details and stuff. And then they're still making a determination. And it's been a process that's been already 3 months, 4 months in the works. And so even waiting for the ability to pay for prescriptions can be a time consuming thing. And it's these prescriptions that we can't afford to buy without the help. And so it's daunting because I know that he needs them and that he's been doing better with them, but there's not a whole lot we can do with what's going on. So we're just doing the best we can with what we've got. So
That's
it
right.
can be stressful, especially like for him, like he's stressed out about when he starts thinking about it. So that can be difficult.
Mhm.
And then um the whole spending more than you're earning. Well, right now he has a part-time job. I've got part-time jobs. And, you know, even with all our part-time jobs, we're not making enough. Right. And so
Right.
he's been like actively looking for a full-time job, and he thought he had one and then it fell through the cracks. And so it's it's a concern, right? Because we want to be making more than we're spending, but to be able to find that perfect job when you are already struggling with health problems, and you know that employers look at that when they're about to hire you,
Right.
it's difficult, right? And so they don't want to hire someone that's going to be sick. They're going to want to hire someone who's healthy. And so all these things pile up and it becomes stressful.
Mhm. Yeah, one more thing comes to mind too is when you're kind of living that paycheck to paycheck, living from moment to moment, um, and not being able to save up for your future, just even that concern or that stress and worry of not even being able to retire, right? I'm seeing more and more elderly people still in the workforce than was even 15, 20 years ago. And it's because, I mean, obviously inflation, all of those, the higher cost of living, all of those things are happening, but more and more people are finding it difficult to be able to retire
Mm.
financially, which is a major concern. And this is something we need to really address and take a serious look at now before that becomes an issue. Now, one thing I really wanted to highlight today on this podcast was just the stress that is linked to debt, right? And, you know, sometimes we very innocently and well intentioned get into some forms of debt, whether it's a car payment, a mortgage, maybe a loan for something that we wanted to purchase. And we don't have crystal balls. We can't see the future. We don't know what our financial situation will be, but we often, you know, think the best case scenario and we're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to do this because this is what we believe our future will be." But when you get into that devastating cycle of debt, it is so difficult to get out of,
Yeah.
right? And it takes so much effort and hard work to work your way out of that. And in the meantime, it causes a lot of suffering. Like I just think of even the interest and in some cases compounding interest, right? And I saw this post the other day, and I thought it's so true. And so I just want to read it to all of those that are listening. It says, "Debt can cause stress that is linked to health issues such as cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, stomach disorders, sleep disorders, anxiety, anger, reduced performance at work or school, and relationship problems. And I can see all of these as being linked to stress, especially from debt. My husband and I, when I married my husband, he was $750,000 in debt because of a business relationship gone bad. And so for 20 plus years now, we've been paying down this debt. And I can tell you that it is a heavy burden to carry. It is a big stress to carry. And, there are days when, you know, that you have something that's looming and you have to come up with the money and you have to meet that commitment. And, it's hard to sleep. It's hard to get a good night's sleep because you're worried or you're focusing on those things and um you know, your emotions are really being stirred up by those things. When you have that pressure, that you have that high blood pressure, it reduces your performance. Like all of these situations, all of these descriptors I've experienced personally. And I know that if you are dealing with the stress of debt, that you are likely experiencing many of these physical symptoms as well. And to just kind of be mindful of that and not necessarily attribute it to being like, "Oh my goodness, I must have a defective heart. I must have all these things," but just recognizing that a lot of these physical symptoms that you might be experiencing is because of the stress that's associated with the financial situation you're finding yourself in right now. So, Connie, I want to talk about just, some of the unhealthy mindsets that we can develop over time when it comes to finances and, how that kind of debilitates us or kind of holds us back from finding freedom in the area of finances. So, I think we have 5 that I want to cover today. And obviously, there's way more mindsets out there that would cause us to kind of fall into the trap of financial overwhelm. But these 5 I just wanna highlight because for me, I personally think that they really reflect, a large majority of, people out there. So the first one is sometimes we have adequate resources, we just have our priorities in wrong order. So we sometimes prioritize feeding a desire before paying, necessities or our bills. And what I have found is that if that is our case, if that's what we're operating out of, that mindset, I have found that it's often linked to different wounds that I've had in my life, different lies that maybe I've believed about my life, about finances in general, about, um, even my value, right? Sometimes we'll place more value on, purchasing an item that will make me feel better in the moment than providing for my basic needs. And so, in this regard to this mindset, I would ask you to ask yourself, be honest with yourself. What are you spending your money on? Right? It's almost like take a reality check and, be honest with yourself. What are you spending your money on? And if you're finding that you're prioritizing wants over needs, maybe it's time to make a shift. Connie, do you want to go over the second point?
Sure.
Sure.
Sometimes you find it difficult to receive gifts, especially financially, and that can be rooted in not wanting to be seen as needy or not a good financial steward. And it comes from some like judgment a lot of the time or a vow made. And think like it's also a thing of pride for some people, right? Like you don't want to receive gifts from people because it hurts your pride, right? To accept something when like when you're deep inside you feel like you should be caring for yourself, right? And it makes you feel like you're not capable of doing that. And so it really hurts your pride. And um I think you just really need to evaluate it because honestly, when people are trying to give, a lot of times they're giving out of like a good place. They're giving out of like a heart to want to help. And, they actually want to see you succeed. And in a way, you're stealing their blessing by not letting them help you, right? Because when you give, it brings you joy, it brings you a lot of things. And it's really a good thing for people to give. So you're kind of like robbing them of that when you're not willing to receive it. And so I guess the honesty check here is, do you have a difficult time receiving from others? And if so, why? Ask yourself that. And that'll help you realize what the core of that is, whether it's like judgment, whether it's the pride issue, whether it's, a vow you made, like that you would never be like your parents, right? Like, our parents were always struggling financially. And I know I made that vow, like, I never want to be like my parents. And there's been days where I'm like, I am in the same mess. How did this happen to me? Right? Well, you need to break that vow that you made and realize that you're in a situation that was out of your control most of the time. And whenever you have a situation that's in your control, you can make different choices to get out. So you're not stuck there.
That's right. Yeah, the third mindset I wanted to chat about today was this mindset goes kind of the opposite to the one that Connie just covered, but it's when you constantly are giving to others at the expense of providing your own needs, and even to the extreme going into debt to please others. And I find that this is also often, operated from a place of like secrecy, right? People who operate with this mindset will often, you know, want to put out the airs or perception that, they're wealthy or that they have more than enough, right? And so they're over generous, or they, if they see a need, they want to fill it, but it's often putting their own financial situation at risk. And often I have found that this is rooted in fear of what other people will think, fear of how others will perceive them, right? Because if people knew what was currently like really going on behind the scenes, that they would feel like they maybe those relationships wouldn't be the way that they are, or maybe they lose some relationships. And so for this mindset, I would ask yourself this question: what is your motivation when you give? Right? Because I believe giving is an incredible gift. And not only does it bless the person who is giving, but also the person receiving. But I believe it has to be done with the right motivation, right? Because if the motivation is coming from a place of fear, or a place of wanting to please others, or having a fear of what other people will think of you, then that's definitely the wrong motivation. And it needs to come from a place of, you know, you have the ability to give it without putting yourself in harm's way. And I think that's really important to consider when um being financially generous to others. Another one that I wanted to bring up too is what I call financial addictions. And those are repetitive financial decisions that put yourself in bondage. For example, a shopping addiction, which would be purchasing stuff that you don't need just to make yourself better. Or another one could be gambling, thinking, if only I could win, I can get myself out of this mess. Now, when we make habitual decisions financially with, any mindset that's similar to one of these things, we get stuck in these cycles. And I call them addictions for a reason, because once you start operating in that mindset and in that pattern, it's hard to break. And, you know, especially with a shopping addiction, there is a high, or there is a feeling, there is an emotion that's associated when you buy that item that you love. It gives you momentary satisfaction, momentary relief of whatever else you're trying to avoid, but it doesn't last very long. And then you're tempted to go out and do it again, right? And so these are things that we really need to be mindful of and be asking ourselves, you know, do I have any spending habits that are maybe hiding some other deeper unmet need, worry, or insecurity in myself? And if I'm seeing any repetitive patterns like that, then maybe it's time to really consider um, looking at that a bit deeper and bringing some, changes to that kind of behavior and finding out the why, right? Why do I feel it necessary to, when I'm in deep stressful situations to go purchase something that really at the end of the day, it's not going to matter, right? Whereas I could be using that money towards saving for my future or paying down debts or even covering my basic needs.
The fifth one reminds me of like Wilma Flintstones on the Flintstones. Those of you who don't know what the Flintstones are, don't worry, it's okay. It's an old cartoon. But she would always go, charge it. And so the fifth one is I don't have enough money to cover this need or desire, so I'm going to put it on my credit card or get financing. And it has become like the go-to for our society, right? Like, oh, I don't have enough cash, so I'm going to charge it. I'm going to put it on my credit card. I'm going to get financing. And it's a ploy of the enemy to keep us in debt, to keep us captive, to keep us in bondage, right? And we stay there a lot of times. Because it's just as easy to pay with credit, and then, oh, well, I get my points and I get my all these other things, but the debt that goes along with it and the chain that grows around your neck becomes quite heavy.
Mhm.
So the honesty check question here is, do you view your credit card limits within the amounts you have available to spend? So meaning, do you look at all of your money that you earn in a month and say, okay, so that's my spending limit? Or do you look at your credit card limits on top of that and say, oh, I actually have this much to spend, right? Because if you're looking at it that way, you have to shift the way you're thinking. Otherwise, you're always going to be playing with that line and you're always going to push yourself further and further into debt. And then I was thinking about another one, and like Laura said, this was an exhaustive list, but another one came to my mind, and that's I don't have enough money to start saving, so I'm
Right.
not going to. And that's a dangerous place to be as well, because when those unexpected things come up, if you have savings, it can save you. Haha, get it? Savings save you. Um, but if you don't have savings, then you're immediately going into debt with those things. And so savings can actually save you from having to go into debt. And if you're waiting until you have enough money to start saving, you'll never save. So you need to
Right.
actually make sacrifices to save off of every paycheck, because otherwise you're not gonna have a cushion if anything goes wrong. If any of those things that happen out of the blue happen, you're not gonna have anything.
Yeah. So true. Oh, so, we shared a lot of heavy, heavy information today about financial stress and overwhelm, but fact of the matter is it's all relevant. It's all true. It's all happening. And I'm sure all of you who are listening, you can resonate with some, maybe part, maybe all of what we shared. And if that's you, I don't want to leave you here feeling discouraged. But the whole point of today's podcast is to kind of take an honest assessment of where we are within our financial situation and kind of start acknowledging and recognizing what are some of the mindsets that we have when it comes to finances and where do those come from? Because the first step to finding freedom in this area is to actually acknowledge where you are and how you got there, right? You can't change what you don't know. You can't change what you don't understand, right? Obviously, if you're in this mess, you've been in this mess maybe by a random act of, like I said, some of those unexpected things, or maybe it's been an accumulative, choice after choice after choice that's gotten you into this difficult situation. But either way, whether it was a sudden occurrence or, the choices you made along the way, you're still in the same place, right? And we still need to kind of acknowledge where we're at, why we got here, how we got here, so that we can actually start making the changes, start implementing some strategies and tools so that we can come out from underneath this financial overwhelm and finally step into freedom when it comes to financial stress and overwhelm. And so, Connie, unless you have any final thoughts or anything about what we shared today, I think I'll just close up and we can come back next time and share more of the hopeful side of finances and some strategies of how to get out of the overwhelm.
Um, I was gonna share a quote, but
Oh,
it's
go ahead.
not. Debt is like a ravenous animal that demands to be fed and doesn't care if you've eaten or not. And
Mm,
that's what really a key point that I wanted to make sure was mentioned is that, and that's by Charity Bradshaw, by the way, is that um, regardless of whether your bills are paid, regardless of whether there's food on the table, debt will be screaming to be paid first. And
right.
um, you have to pay your interest, you have to pay your minimum payments, and if you miss, then you end up getting in worse trouble. And so it becomes like this very, very daunting thing. And I don't want to leave on a negative note, but at the same time, I want you to be realizing that when you go into debt, that it is a animal that needs to be fed more so than anything else. And so it's not something that you should go into lightly. It's something that you should really consider before you go choose to put yourself in a debt situation. But like Laura said, our next one is going to bring more hope and more strategies. So don't get stuck here. Just like Laura said, acknowledge where you're at, be honest with yourself. And our next podcast will bring more positivity and light to this topic.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank everyone for listening in today. I know that, kind of putting your life under a microscope and an examining glass, isn't always easy, right? Kind of recognizing maybe some of the unhealthy decisions we've made or mindsets that we've carried that have gotten us to the place that we're at can sometimes be frustrating. Um, but I leave you with this encouragement that that's not the end of your story. And it's actually the best place for you to be at, that acknowledgement place so that you can start making the right steps to move forward. So, I want to just thank you all for joining us this time and join us next time as we talk about what strategies you can use to manage financial stress and to shift and change the outcome of your life. All right, so we'll see you next time on the NOSA Unleashed podcast. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the NOSA Unleashed podcast.